Weightlifting scoop time. We've been going for over a week, but we are back. We're going to have a good episode today. We have Nick Shaw of Renaissance Periodization actually in the building today. So we had him through Skype about a month ago, and he's actually here today. And then we have Glenn and James.
Hello.
Hello.
What's up, guys?
So that unfamiliar voice, that was Nick. So, yeah, we're definitely excited to have him. This has kind of like been happening in North Carolina for about a month now. But you know what? They banned dodgeball in elementary schools. And I honestly can't believe that. I mean, I think it's important for kids to do things that are athletic. And I think, jumping, moving, juking, and throwing, I mean, those are athletic things that I think kids should do. I mean, what do you guys think?
Well, throwing balls at other kids is very important, I think. That should be one of the cornerstones of physical activity, especially younger kids. I wish my son did a lot more of that, in fact.
Well, I think the dodging, throwing, jumping, and all that stuff is good, but the whole part about throwing balls at other kids is what they don't like.
Well, I think that is the key to the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, unless you're going to hit somebody in the face with the ball, it kind of loses its charm. I think you need to have that facial contact hard, or else it just is not exciting.
What do you think, Nick? You're a new father, so do you want your kids playing dodgeball?
Yeah, I don't have anything against it. I mean, I certainly played it growing up, so, it helps build that competitive drive. And I remember taking a dodgeball to the face back in the day, and I don't think it really changed me. So
I think we all have good memories of those days, I mean, everybody got hit once in a while, and nobody was permanently harmed by it. In fact, I think the society would probably be a lot better off if we all had played more dodgeball and got more hits to the face or whatever else with the dodgeball. I think it builds character. I think it's a good thing.
Well, I guess what we're getting at is, James, you're saying that they are saying that aggression builds aggression. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. And also another point that I would like to make is all four of us in this room are people that are in the athletic field now. So if we asked what's a stereotype of somebody that's not athletic, the person that answers phones at AT&T or something, they probably wouldn't like it. And then that's where they want people to not get balls thrown in their face.
Well, those people shouldn't be allowed to make decisions for the rest of us.
Well,
come on.
There's different ways to look at it. I mean, one concept is that aggression is natural, and you have a certain amount of it, and then once it's used up, you don't have more aggression. That is your outlet for your aggression. Or you can believe that aggression builds aggression, and the more aggressive that you are towards others, it's just going to escalate. And then in that case, dodgeball may not be good. But I personally think that you have a certain amount of aggression naturally. If you use it up in other ways, you will not, you won't use other violent
in other words, you're saying letting out your aggression is going to make you less likely to do bad things.
Yeah.
So I would tend to agree with that. I think that in some cases, you're going to be more likely in certain cases to be more aggressive if you are in a very aggressive environment. But I don't think that that's necessarily truism at all. I think that in many cases, there's nobody wants to be absolutely aggressive all the time. We just aren't mentally set up for that. So once we use up the amount of aggression that we're comfortable with, most people are going to tone it down.
Any different viewpoints?
Well, I guess I would say that's what wrestling's for.
Yes.
Well, how is wrestling different than dodgeball? Because I guess the other person chose to do wrestling that you're wrestling against.
Well, the other person chose to play dodgeball too, but well, if you know what, I don't really know the difference.
If PE is
the other person's the target.
I mean, if PE is mandatory and the teacher says all the kids have to do PE and they have to play dodgeball today, they're basically forced.
Yeah, and I guess wrestling is not a required PE exercise.
Well, wrestling was required when I was in PE. When I was in even up into high school, we had a wrestling unit or whatever, where we all had to wrestle. And we all won or lost matches in our wrestling unit.
That
and that was like
PE class.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of PE. I loved it. We waited like crazy till wrestling, and that was my favorite part of PE.
Well,
of course, there were other people that didn't like that, but people have to be exposed to different things.
In high school, you happened to be pretty good at wrestling, right, Glenn?
Yeah, I was reasonably good.
Got recruited to college to wrestle.
Yeah, I didn't do that well in a state tournament my senior year because I got my shoulder separated, had a fairly terrible injury. But if it wouldn't have been for that, I was ranked number 1 in the state of Kansas and nationally ranked high in the top 2 or 3 nationally, in freestyle and both freestyle and Greco-Roman. So I was a fairly good wrestler, I guess I would say. And it was my favorite sport. And I really, really liked it. But I would say that in general, not just myself, but in general of a guy's PE class, there was an even split. If there were 10 kids, or say there were 15 kids in PE, there were going to be 10 or 12 that loved wrestling, and wrestling was their favorite thing to do in PE, their favorite unit, I guess. And then there would be 2 or 3 that hated it, absolutely hated it. Mm-hmm. So there was a majority that really liked it, and a few guys that hated it,
well,
just like with any other sport.
You can't please everyone. My dad also used to tell me when I was younger that they wrestled in regular PE class, and that's how they recruited their wrestling team. So it wasn't like, I don't know. It's like everyone tried it, and then it gave everyone an opportunity to find a passion, as opposed to just randomly choosing it, or only the people who had parents that could pick them up later could do it. But whatever. Society's getting soft. I think they should play dodgeball, but hey, that's just me. Anyways, so Nick, last time we had you on, it was through Skype, so sometimes it was hard to hear you, and it was hard to have a flowing conversation. So we're excited to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and I know you're working with some more weightlifters now, so.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Nationals coming up next week. We probably have anywhere from about 6 or 7 athletes competing there. Getting more CrossFit athletes too, and we work with some other, powerlifting, strongman competitors. So we kind of cover all aspects of the strength sports. Pretty cool.
And that's one thing that interested me. As most of you guys know, Nick is my nutritionist, and I've been working with him and have dropped a fair amount of weight, and an entire weight class actually. So with that being said, one thing that enticed me about Nick's background is that he works with a lot of strength athletes and different types of strength athletes, not just bodybuilders. So with that being said, now that you're into weightlifting and you have like 7 or 8 weightlifting clients, are there many differences?
The main differences, I guess, come from, you start with body weight, and that kind of helps determine a lot of variables for sort of the macronutrient intake. But, the thing that's pretty cool about weightlifting is you guys are all pretty crazy in that, you train sometimes multiple times a day. So you guys get to eat a lot of carbs. So I happen to think that's pretty cool. I think everyone here would probably agree with that. I don't know too many people that don't like carbs.
Yeah. Now, one thing, there's also a lot of different ways to train in weightlifting. Now, some people train with a lot of volume, and some people train low volume and high intensity. When you're coming up with a nutrition plan for someone, how does that play into it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it definitely plays a role. So I guess a good example would be if you're, training, let's say, I don't know, maybe it's the off season, so to speak, and you're training with sets of 8 to 10, some people do. Well, it's probably going to require a higher energy level, and you get to eat more carbs with that than, say, in, like a peaking phase where you sort of lower that volume, but the intensity is probably still pretty high leading up to a meet. So, you're doing sets of, you're doing doubles or triples, probably not going to be eating as much carbs, leading up to a meet as you would, when you're training with really high volume loads.
So when you start working with someone, you basically start with body weight, and is the protein intake pretty steady depending on their lean body mass and body weight?
Yeah, so a pretty good rule of thumb is, and the evidence supports this pretty well, about a gram per pound. I know that's kind of maybe a little low, some people might think, and I have to sort of do the calculation with kilos, but a gram per pound is usually about the right spot to start, because what happens is sort of at any given weight, there's sort of an optimal, calorie intake to maintain your weight. So what happens is, let's say you eat more of one macronutrient, let's say you overeat protein. Well, what does that mean? That means you have to eat less of carbs and or fats. And generally speaking, those are probably going to help you perform a little bit better, specifically carbs.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed when I started weightlifting was I started eating more carbs. I used to be very low carb, high protein and high fat. But now I'm getting a little bit more carbs, and I actually lost a lot of weight since I started weightlifting too. Most of that being muscle, which I guess I could attribute to less protein too. Kind of that exchange from protein and carbs. So less protein, more carbs. Now I'm a 77.
Lean, mean fighting machine.
But a lot of that too is you were doing bodybuilding / powerlifting training, and so your goal was to put on as much muscle mass as possible, whereas in weightlifting you want...
Yeah, we're doing maxes of set of 5 is the most.
Yeah.
Training effect does have a big role into it. I don't train any upper body hardly at all, other than just weightlifting specific stuff. I don't do my tricep push downs or incline curls.
But we did take a picture where you were flexing, and everybody said your tricep game was still on top.
Oh, so. Yeah? All right. Glad I got something left.
No, but so if if and when you move up in weight class, your weight distribution might be different at being a weightlifter. You might have more leg size, as opposed to having a lot of upper body.
Even now, my legs are a lot bigger than they were before. I'm squatting more too, being lighter, but I lost mostly upper body stuff because it's just not as useful in weightlifting nowadays to have too big of an upper body. So I guess if I moved up in a weight class, I'd want it to go all into my butt and quads. Maybe I'll actually be able to squat then. What do you think, Coach?
I think that, bigger quads and hips are 9 times out of 10 going to be the biggest advantage you can have in weightlifting. I think for you, your back isn't like too unnecessarily huge, so I would say back.
Oh,
quads
man,
and
you
hips.
said I had a small back. Okay, so change the subject. No.
No, James does have a very strong back, though. I will say his deadlift is insane, and clean deadlift, and his pull is obviously your strength. But although your squat is catching up, so.
I feel like I haven't maxed out on the deadlift. Well, I realize that I've been here muscle driver for like 2 years or so. I don't think I've maxed out on the deadlift since then.
But I think that your pulling strength has progressively gone up.
Yeah. Yeah, especially, doing powerlifting too, the pull is a completely different group of muscles. The clean pull and the snatch pull have a lot more quads in them, where the powerlifting deadlift is mostly back and hamstrings, at least for me.
Well, it's more of a lower back type movement.
Yep.
There's a lot of actual back extension in that instead of hip extension, which for the pulls, you're dealing more with hip extension.
Now when you're working with someone, so now based on averages, you kind of find that at a certain body weight, someone needs to eat a certain amount of calories. So then at that point, that's how you determine like your macro distribution. Have you ever worked with a client that just could eat insane amounts of food and had a hard time gaining weight?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly genetics play a role. You'll find out that you can have 2 exact same clients and they're eating the same amount of food, but one can't gain weight to save their life, and the other one's just, packing on the weight. So, it's just, genetics, I guess. Don't downplay the role of genetics. They're pretty popular. Pretty important, I should say.
Pretty popular.
Yeah. Well,
Popular, powerful, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you'll be pretty popular if you have really good genetics, I bet. So.
Well, so when you're talking about averages and you're talking about like most of the time, someone at this body weight, you're going to start out at this many calories a day, etc. I mean, at the end of the day, you talk a lot about you just have to weigh yourself daily to find your the right amount of calories for maintenance.
Yeah, a good starting point is to weigh yourself a couple times a week. You probably don't want to get too obsessed with it and, weigh yourself every day, multiple times a day. You might freak out, let's say, you drink some water, have some salty food, the next day you could be up a little bit. So you can just kind of spot the trends by, weighing yourself once at the start of the week, once later in the week, maybe preferably after a lower carb day to sort of get a truer sense of your body weight. And you can sort of start tracking those trends and you can determine, well, hey, if your weight's not going up after a week or two, well, you're probably eating in a state where, you're maintaining your body weight. If your goal is then to gain weight, well, you need to eat a little bit more. And then that's where, where you decide, where do I add from here and all that. But that's sort of the starting point in determining out the number of calories, which is, the most important variable in, trying to change your body composition, whether it's gain muscle or lose fat.
I think now when you talk about averages, I think this also plays a big role when it comes to the averages in weightlifting, because people are like, okay, according to the Russian charts, I should be clean and jerking 80% of my squat, which was the average. But you got to remember, that's the average. There were people who fell below 80% and people who were above 80%. So you might be one of those people who isn't exactly the average. Most likely you're going to be close to the average, but sometimes I think people kind of get stuck thinking, oh, I've gotten strong enough because the chart says this, and I'm only clean and jerking 70%. If you're at 70%, that might be far away from 80, but if you're at 75, maybe you could still push your squat and get better. Would James and Glenn, would you guys?
I think those, any thing like that is just a guideline. And you never want to say, I'm strong enough, because you're never strong enough. No matter what percentage you're lifting, if you double the amount you could squat, without a doubt, you could clean a little bit more, So while basically you're dealing with that opportunity cost, you get to a point where the work that it would require for you to squat a huge amount more would be such that it would be counterproductive. But there's never going to be a point where squatting more in and of itself would be counterproductive. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess there would be these percentages and everything make sense if you have a consistent technique.
Yes.
I know you wrote a little article the other day for Catalyst Athletics.
Mm-hmm.
Performance menu, I guess is what it's called. And that's one of your things that you were talking about is celebrating success. And one of your celebrations was to be able to hit 90% for like 5 singles, to be able to have that consistency without misses, and using that as a motivation. And I think that has a big part into this too, with how much you can clean based on your best back squat. If you don't have a consistent technique, you might hit 80% one day, and then most of your other days are down at 65.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something else to keep in mind is first develop a consistent technique and then really get into these percentages and numbers.
Right.
Because it's going to mess them all up if you don't have a consistent technique.
But as you become more advanced and you are more advanced in weightlifting, if you've always squatted 75% of your back squat, say, from the time you were little until now, then maybe you're just not the average, And that is something to look at. Look at the trend in your own weightlifting, not the trend of the averages of everyone, because you're unique.
And it's good to have a coach too that can see all the factors that are going on there. I mean, some people might have crazy proportions where they just can't squat that much.
Mm-hmm.
But they can clean and jerk a ton. Who knows?
Yeah. And I mean, specifically snatch, if people have odd proportions, like long, joints and whatnot, like my buddy Jake, he used to be able to snatch like a ridiculous, percentage of his back squat. It just was built not necessarily ideally for the back squat, so he's never going to be a huge back squatter, but he's built pretty good for the snatch, so his numbers are a little skewed towards the top end.
Yeah, speaking of Jake Rubash,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that he hit 137 for a double in the snatch the other day.
Yeah.
He's a 77-kilo lifter. So, yeah, it's a good double.
Yeah, always been a real good snatcher. So kind of back on topic, I guess my point of all that was that averages, we talk about averages, and that's why you stress to weigh yourself multiple times a week, and because, it's unusual that you could eat a massive amount of calories as your maintenance, but for some people that's true. Or for some people, and then, so they're not going to fit the mold. And a lot of those people are very outspoken that, okay, this maintenance calories for this body weight doesn't make sense because I'm losing a ton of weight. So. Yeah,
some of those people are outliers, and, again, everyone's going to be a little bit different, so, it's hard to speak in sort of generalizations. But, there's, everyone's going to be different because everyone has different, levels of physical activity as well. Say if someone's, working a factory job, they're a mechanic and they're, picking things up all day and moving them around versus someone who sits in an office, well, you're going to start to see pretty large differences there in the amount of foods they eat to sort of maintain or, whether they're trying to lose or gain.
And when I started with you, I will say that I would always label foods, I guess, good and bad, and I kind of got stuck in that mentality. And then I think one of the cool things is that I no longer say this is a good food or this is a bad food. I say this food has a place right here, and I should eat this much of it at this time. And that's really helped me a lot because I don't view it like, oh, this is a good food so I can have as much of it as I want, which, that's not obviously the right way to look at things. So when you start working with a CrossFitter who does paleo or something where they don't really count, they're not doing zone, but they're just doing paleo, and they're labeling foods good and bad, do you find they kind of change their mindset a little bit?
Yeah, I hope so. One of my favorite, I guess, terms is, like clean eating. I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean you're washing your food or what? Like, I'm not really sure. Like you said, certain things that aren't traditionally, seen as, clean, let's say, workout window carbs are going to be a little bit higher GI. Those probably aren't considered, clean by paleo people or whatever, but they certainly have the role in the strength world. So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of those, labels. So everything kind of has its place, and it kind of gets back to the nutritional priorities. The first one being calories in, calories out. That's the most important part. And then the second most important part is the macronutrient breakdown. And you're kind of getting down into the very last one. So the third one would be nutrient timing. And then the very last one that's really not all that important. But what seems to happen is people like to harp on those, minor details. If we use an analogy of building a car, let's say, the engine is the number one most important thing that you need in a car in order to make it go. So that's your calories in, calories out. Whereas, determining whether you're going to listen to your CD player or Sirius radio is like, food composition. It's not really all that important in making the car go, but a lot of people, want to harp on that. So that's where you get into sort of the whole, clean eating. Is it organic or is it not? Do you have to eat organic in order to be successful?
How many scratches do you have on your CD?
Yeah, right. Like, maybe you'll see some arguments on that, and it's like, it's really not all that important in the grand scheme of things. Is it, does it play a role? Well, sure. You want to be able to listen to nice music while you're driving, down the road. You don't want to listen to something that's skipping all the time. But if you're going to start to focus on, where should the bulk of my, time and resources go? Well, you probably want a pretty good engine first, so that's where, calories, macronutrient breakdown comes in. And then you get into the smaller details.
Yeah, and we talk about this with recovery at seminars, like the things that people harp on with recovery is like, chiropractor, cold plunge, all that kind of stuff. And
ending on hot or cold.
Yeah, the little things, whereas they're just not sleeping. They're up all night and... Yeah. And they're not
stress.
They're not eating enough calories, or they're eating not the right stuff or the right amount. And they're just stressed out all the time. They work 40 hours a week. They work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And then they're on top of that trying to train like we do without full-time jobs. So it is interesting because people do like to focus on the smaller details a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely. And, people like to harp on, well, is it, saturated or is it unsaturated fat? Well, it's again, that's one of the minor details. Does it play a role? Absolutely. But, it's probably not one of the, the main things you want to be focusing on. You want to get everything else in line first, and then you can really start to focus on those smaller details later down the line.
So, when would be the best time to eat ice cream? This is really what I care about.
To eat ice cream, man. Yeah, hey, take that weekly cheat meal, man. Unless, you're stepping on the bodybuilding stage in a couple of weeks, it's, it's probably not going to be the end of the world if you sneak in some ice cream. Maybe just lower a little bit of calories, earlier on in the day or something to make up for that. So.
Would that be better to do post-training?
Well, do you like frozen yogurt or do you want ice cream?
I want ice cream.
You want ice cream?
Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah.
Me and Jacob Sipkin go on Haagen-Dazs. None of that Ben and Jerry stuff.
Well, then I would suggest you probably want to do that a little bit further away from the workout because it's probably pretty high in fat.
Yeah.
So if you want to go the froyo route, you can probably get away with that post-workout. But if you're going to go ice cream and has a bunch of fat, eat it later on at night.
Nice. I think that used to be my pre-workout, actually. When I was in high school in powerlifting, I used to ride my moped down to the gas station, pick up a pint of ice cream.
Ride your moped to the gas station.
Yep.
James,
Oh, Lord.
I feel like we will never know everything about James.
Yeah, so let me tell you something about this moped. As some of you guys know, I grew up in the boating community. And then when I was in 5th grade, I joined the landlubbers and I moved onshore. And when I was in like 9th grade, I had a friend that was living on a boat up in the Outer Banks somewhere. I'm not quite sure, but he found a moped and he started riding that thing around. So he rode it off the end of a dock, and he ruined the engine. So he brought it down to me, and we worked on it and all that stuff, and fixed it up and got it running. The muffler had rusted off. The pedals had rusted off, which you use to start it. So I'm holding this thing, and you have to start it by moving it, and that's how it cranks. So I'm running alongside of this moped, and then crank it up, and that's how I used to get it started. And it was really loud because it didn't have a muffler. And, when you're in 9th grade, you can't have a car yet. And I was very independent. So I started driving the moped around, take that to the gas station, get my ice cream, then go train. Never missed any training. That's what good moped is.
That's living the dream.
Yep.
So I'm curious, even though the moped didn't have working pedals, was it still legal as a moped?
Well, I got pulled over once because my taillight went out, so I taped a flashlight on there.
That's ingenious.
That was not legal.
That was not legal.
Yeah, I got in trouble for that. But I was right outside of my house, in front of my house when I got pulled over, so he let me off.
That's just dirty pool, I think. For a
Yeah.
cop to pull you over. We got a flashlight taped on and right in front of your house, and they're still pulling you over. I mean, that's just...
Well, he didn't know it was his house.
He didn't know, yeah.
There wasn't a sign like, this is the
This is
guy
James' house.
on the motorcycle's house.
Well, actually, my
I'm
parents
sure
owned
that
the
James.
business.
I'm sure that James would have said something like, "Hey, this is my house." I mean, I don't. It probably wasn't
Yeah, well,
a huge
that's
mystery.
That's
how-
why he let me off the hook. So, because I was right there.
Well, good
So-
for him.
If you guys get a moped and your light goes out, don't put a flashlight on the back of it.
Well, so this is kind of a funny story, getting pulled over by a cop. I guess speaking of Jake, we used to play Monopoly every once in a while.
Oh,
And,
I've heard this one. This is a good one.
And he lost and a little pissed off about it. And
Talk about being competitive.
so
Somebody
he-
played dodgeball.
he leaves our apartment and he's driving down the road, speeding a little bit. The cop pulls him over and comes up and says, "Sir, why were you speeding? Do you know how fast you were going?" And he's like, "I'm sorry, I just got out of the most intense Monopoly game of my life." And it was like, a Friday night where like people our age are typically out super drunk and going crazy. So the cop just laughs and just says, "Okay, just slow down on the way home." Like, it's just something that he didn't expect. So
Those intense Monopoly players.
yeah. So I guess if you're doing something innocent and you're just honest about it, occasionally you find a sympathetic cop.
I found a couple of those in my life.
Yeah, you've been pretty lucky.
I have. I have a long history of that. I got lucky multiple times in high school. I had what most guys have at some point, whether it's from age 16 to 18 or 14 to 16 or whatever. Most guys have a certain period where they like to drive cars or motorcycles fast. And I had that certain period and got in trouble multiple times for racing or, driving excessively fast or run whatever. And, I had a couple of real, not so nice police officers, and I've ran into a few nice ones that ended up letting me off also. And so, always good to have a mix there.
Well, Glenn has a truck and a beard, and he's the typical American hardworking man.
And a Texas license plate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that Texas license plate stood me in good stead many times when I lived in California.
Yeah.
Because after I moved to California, I kept my Texas license plate for a while. I kept it as long as I could, basically. And I got pulled over and let off multiple times. In fact, time and time again when I lived in California. And I think that probably had something to do with the fact that I had a 3/4 ton truck, and a Texas license plate, etc. And, I think that most cops, when they pull you over, they don't expect, a person that drives a 3/4 ton truck to be out doing anything bad. It's just like the stereotype is just like a working guy or something. It's not somebody that's doing any shenanigans.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I gotta watch out for those weightlifting coaches, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Those guys are crazy.
Definitely.
Yeah. So if you were going to tell, a weightlifter now, what's the biggest thing that you see, Nick, that people are making the mistake of?
I guess there's a couple of them. One starting with, I guess there's this assumption out there that if you want to cut weight, you automatically have to cut carbs. And I'm not sure exactly how that got started. Maybe it has to do with paleo being a little bit lower carb in general, but
I think the Atkins diet.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. They're kind of in the same mold there, but certainly that's if your goal and focus is on strength and performance, you're probably not going to want to cut carbs first.
Well, I think that and the fact that cutting carbs is generally the one way that you can have the quickest progress in cutting weight.
Yeah,
and that's not because you're actually cutting body fat or anything exceptionally useful. But generally, if you cut your carbs down to nothing within 2 or 3 days, you have quite a bit of success in cutting weight. I wouldn't say that's all good, but it generally moves the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? And we actually find that pretty typical. If we have a client who is used to eating, just whatever their normal diet or whatever that's, not really low in carbs, just sort of, average, I guess, so to speak. You come across a low carb day and all of a sudden, you drop like a kilo or so. And I tell you what, that's a good psychological boost when you're starting a diet. You look on the scale and all of a sudden you go down 1 or 2 kilos in that first week. Man, that's a good feeling. That's good, psychological boost to really sort of stay on track and keep things going. So that's absolutely right.
But then once you cut those carbs and, your glycogen stores are lower over time, your progress stalls, so then people get frustrated and they're all cranky because they're not eating carbs.
Yeah, absolutely. And what ends up happening, I've talked to a few different people, sort of the CrossFit weightlifting world, who've tried that approach, and what ends up happening is, they see great results at first. They drop a lot of weight, but eventually their strength and performance will suffer, and then they just, start to backtrack a little bit towards, where they were, and you just get discouraged when you start getting weaker and, the scale stops moving and you go, well, where do I go from here? I can't really lower my carbs anymore. So, what do you do? And then, people start eating, a little more junk food and all of a sudden, they're kind of right back to where they started. So I guess moral of the story here is, instead of necessarily dropping your carbs first, why don't you take a look at your fat intake and sort of decrease that because it plays less of a role in, the strength and performance outcome. And, that's a good starting point. It's it meets criteria number one. You're reducing your calories, so you're meeting sort of that, first nutritional priority. You'll still drop weight. And, if you have a lower carb day on, say, a rest day where you're not really doing as much strenuous activity, you get that good psychological boost too, and you end up losing a lot of weight. Strength doesn't go down. Probably what will happen is strength actually goes up. You start to recover better because you're eating more carbs specifically around the workout window. And I like to refer to that as a win-win. So I don't think too many people would argue with a win-win scenario.
Yeah. I will say, I guess, when I started with you, added a little bit of carbs, kind of like got the protein where it should be because I was probably overeating protein. And then one thing that did is that I never have a sweet tooth anymore, because I am eating enough carbs and the correct amount of carbs, I guess. And some of those carbs are, a small amount of those carbs are pretty high glycemic index, like Fig Newtons, or potentially like a small amount of Lucky Charms or something. So that just it totally satisfies my sweet tooth, and I never want to eat anything bad. So I guess that's a great thing, because if you cut out a whole macronutrient, your body is going to crave that macronutrient like crazy. And at least from my experience.
I think that's absolutely correct. Especially you guys train quite often. If you get to eat, a little bit of Gatorade during your workout, and let's say you're eating some, fat-free Fig Newtons or, some Lucky Charms. Again, I don't know too many people who do not like Lucky Charms. You get to eat that 4, 5, 6 times a week. You're losing weight and you're getting stronger. You're recovering better. You're not really craving carbs. Again, I look at this as who's going to argue with a win-win scenario?
Yeah, so it is interesting. There's a ton of different ways to go about dieting, but this is definitely one that's worked for me. I've known some other people that are like Matt, that's doing carb backloading, which is quite a bit different strategy, but that works for him. So anyways, we just wanted to present this with you guys. I guess, Glenn, you got some good news. You got some glasses, and you're able to see slightly better, so you can read now. Yeah,
slightly better. It's definitely not like a 20/20 situation, but I can read on my Kindle just a little bit now, and which was something was really depressing for a while. I wasn't able to read at all, but the ability to, and I should say that I don't have a lot of field of vision, so it's like I can read like 3 or 4 words at a time. And then I have to shift my eyes over to the next 3 or 4 words. So it's kind of a laborious process, but yeah, I got some glasses that slightly improved, my eyesight, and I'm able now to read with difficulty, but read somewhat. But when you can't read at all, any improvement is obviously great.
Yeah, well, that's got to feel good mentally to finally be able to get through that barrier.
Yeah, definitely.
You've also been watching Parks and Rec.
Yes, I have been on,
Netflix?
Netflix, yes, Netflix. I've been exploring Netflix recently. And in fact, I got one of those cords for my TV that allowed me to hook up the laptop to the TV, and watch, Netflix on my TV. And there's been several things that I've watched part of. Things that I never watched before. I've actually never watched Parks and Recs. I think I've seen, like on the internet, episode here or there, but I never regularly watched it. I never watched Lost, I think everybody watched that. And so I've been able to go back and watch some of those things, That's been welcome, I guess.
So Ron Swanson is the ultimate American man against the government.
I think he is. I think he definitely is.
So I don't want to be a spoiler alert, but we were talking about this before. There's an episode, there's another town, I think it's called Eagleton, that's in competition with Pawnee, where the Parks and Rec department is. And they have a Ron, too. And it's the same position as Ron Swanson. And he's an outdoorsman and all that, and they get along real well at first. But then he finds out that the other Ron is an extreme, I don't know, like a hippie, very hippie-ish. Kind of the opposite of Ron Swanson. And then that got me thinking, what would the opposite Glenn Pendlay be like?
I guess they would be similar to that. because I'm definitely about as far away from a hippie as you could possibly be. So I would say my polar opposite might have some hippie tendencies, as much as that pains me to admit. If I was going to, go the opposite direction, I'd have to have some of those tendencies.
So he probably did not play dodgeball.
He may not have played dodgeball. I, on the other hand, loved dodgeball. In fact, I would still love to play dodgeball any chance that I get in the gym or anywhere else. So yeah, I would be a pro dodgeball person, and my opposite would have to be an anti-dodgeball person.
So if anyone out there finds Glenn's opposite, let us know. I know some people have recently posted a picture of somebody that looked like Glenn on Instagram. I don't know. I think they tagged me and you in it, Travis.
I haven't seen that.
Maybe it was me and Tom. I don't know. But I could just imagine.
Well, I guess we need to get to training here soon, so thanks for coming on the show, Nick. We're glad to have you in Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks for having me down. It's a little bit different than what I'm used to. I'm used to training at a New York sports club in New York City, so I see some interesting things. So it's pretty nice to get down here and see a real training facility and sort of real athletes training. So it's nice.
Yeah, so you'll be able to watch some of us lift some weights later, and if you guys are out there and you have kids that are not playing dodgeball in school anymore, so make them play when they get home.